and there was a filing cabinet in my kitchen, and I can remember the bottom one. I would pull it open, and it was, Christina's adoption folder, and I could get it out anytime I wanted to and read through it, and it had every piece of evidence and artifacts from my adoption, and I could go through it as much as I wanted.
Hey y'all, and welcome. You're listening to the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm your host, Dakota Dawn Johnson, small town cowgirl with Southern roots, blazing a trail as a Midwest ranch wife, mama, and businesswoman. The mission of Cowgirl Confessions is to share the wonderfully wild and Western life stories of cowgirls from all walks of life. We'll talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to navigating careers, cowboys, kids, and cattle. Legendary cowgirl Dale Evans said it best. Cowgirl is a pioneer spirit, a special brand of American courage. The cowgirl faces life head on, lives by her own lights, and makes no excuses. Cowgirls take stands. They speak up. They defend the things they hold dear. A cowgirl might be a rancher, a barrel racer, a bull rider, or an actress. But she's just as likely to be a checker at the local Winn-Dixie, a full-time mother, a banker, an attorney, or an astronaut. If you're into wet saddle blankets, talks with God, buckets full of laughter, and the life lessons learned in the process, kick off your boots and settle in. I pray these stories encourage, empower, and give you just the leg up you need. Here's to embracing the cowgirl state of mind, no matter how wild and Western life may get along the way. Welcome to another episode of the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. Thank you for joining us, friend. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for our guest, Christina Black, to share her story. Did you know that November is recognized as National Adoption Awareness Month? Just so happens Christina's new book, Two Grandpas in a Truck, that shares part of her family's adoption story, was also recently published this month. Let's get to know our guest today, shall we? Christina is an adoptee, a title she shares first because it has made her who she is today and clearly defined family for her, and that is to love and be loved by others. She is a wife, married to her high school sweetheart. They were both born and raised in Mound City, Kansas, and recently moved to Des Moines, Iowa for a job promotion. She is a mama, by adoption and biologically. Her trio is beautifully and wonderfully made, and she does not take for granted what an incredible gift it is to be their mama. Y'all, she is a writer and now published author. Not intentionally at first, but her thoughts and experiences through adoption led her to her first ever children's book about adoption and family. She is a believer in Jesus and the work he can do with open hands and a grace-filled heart. It is truly my honor to share with you Christina Black and her story. There's so much we are going to unpack today on this episode. It's just an honor to have you here, Christina.
Thank you, Dakota. And I am just so excited that it is National Adoption Awareness Month and that we get to do this today in November, and that my book is done for November. And so I'm just going to share about my experience as an adoptee and an adoptive mom. And so we are going to go back 30 some years ago and start there. I am the product of a teenage love affair. I'm pretty sure it was over before they even knew about me. And they were very young. And I know after meeting them how much that decision, how much they thought about that and really took into account all the different factors. And they had a hard time making that decision, and they waited 3 weeks. So I was in foster care for a couple weeks while they really made sure that this was what they thought was the best choice. And I was brought home to my mom and dad and my big sister. She's 5 years older than me, and she's adopted as well from a different family in a different situation. And that is where it all began. So growing up adopted, I just assumed that that was how most families were made, because I think kids think that their normal is everybody else's normal. And my parents were so good at just really making sure that we knew our story. And I don't remember a time that they ever sat us down and said, "Hey, you're adopted." It was just so natural. Growing up, that's just who we were, and that's how our family was formed. And it was wonderful at how they handled that. And there was a filing cabinet in my kitchen, and I can remember the bottom one. I would pull it open, and it was, Christina's adoption folder, and I could get it out anytime I wanted to and read through it. And it had every piece of evidence and artifact from my adoption, and I could go through it as much as I wanted. And that really meant a lot to me, because they shared everything that they knew. And I had it was called a semi-open adoption. So I did not have contact with my birth family except through yearly letters that were sent from our family. We'd send them to the adoption agency. They would filter them, make sure that there wasn't any like identifying information. And then they would send them on. And so we would get a letter back in the same process. With a semi-adoption, there isn't contact until I turned 18, and we both agreed to it. So I would have to say, yes, this is something I'm interested in. Both my birth mom and birth dad would as well. And so that was our norm, the yearly letters and everything. And I can very distinctly remember the time that I remembered that adoption wasn't necessarily considered the quote normal way to start a family. And I was at a really good friend's house. It was a type of friend that you have like a seat at their dinner table. And my mom and her mom actually worked together. And we were sitting around, and some comment was made. And I just very casually said, "Well, I'm adopted. So, that's not really the case." And the silence that just fell over that dining room and the looks that the parents gave, I was like, whoa, like, I obviously like started something here. And her mom said, "Oh, honey, you shouldn't say things like that. That would really upset your mom." And I'm like, no, she knows I'm adopted. Like, like she knows. It's not like a secret. And I just remember like when my mom came to pick me up, them going outside, and on the way home, my mom is like, I just had never thought to tell her, like it wasn't that she was hiding anything. It was just, it's just how our family was made. And we just kind of assumed we lived in a small town. So, you just kind of assume people know. And, that just sticks out into my mind. And
let's pause there for a minute and unpack a little bit, because I do have the privilege of knowing you and your mom. And
yeah.
and wow, what and I live now in the small town that you grew up in. I'm a transplant
Yes.
here, but that's how we met. And I love our small town. I just think that's so great that you're like, yeah, my mom knows I'm adopted. I mean,
yeah, and I think a lot of people did know. I just think in some ways, like it was just so natural. My mom and dad didn't walk around going like, these are our girls, they're adopted. I think that would have been more weird. And if they had, because I mean, it just kind of puts up this, I guess, a barrier, if that makes sense. Like, we're their kids, no matter how we came to them. And they're just amazing. My mom and dad, oh my goodness, I think I could write a whole book on them and how they raised us, just with adoption in mind, like how they made us feel like it was a special part of our story. And, we were very much wanted and loved.
That's incredible, because I didn't know. Again, I didn't grow up in this town, but whenever I remember the first time I ever saw you and your husband Cody. And so whenever I first started dating Tyler and we were coming to church, you had not had your little girls, yet, but you had Gavin. And I know we'll get to more about your story and growing your family in a minute, but
I remember looking and being like, wow, like they look so young, and like they've already started their family. And I just remember y'all being in front of us, in church and being like, I'm looking forward to that next step in my life, because Tyler and I weren't even engaged yet, but like here you were, the little family unit, and then you've grown from there. So not to sidetrack us, but like that was my first contact with you guys. And meeting your mom and being part of the ladies ministry with her, I I didn't know that you were adopted for years. I mean, until you
Yeah.
shared that with me, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, it is just crazy. Again, I think it goes back to like, your normal is, what you think everyone just kind of knows,
mhm.
and especially when you live in a small town, it definitely, you just kind of assume everyone knows your story, and that's not always the case.
Yeah.
But just like at that dinner, I mean, that is forever etched in my mind as like the moment I realized that adoption wasn't everyone's norm. And honestly, when I realized that adoption can make people very, very, very uncomfortable. And I think that from that point on, I was a little bit more aware of that, going into high school. And, I honestly, puberty, you start to really understand where babies come from. And you're like, wait a second, like you can kind of, all these things happen as
Mhm.
you grow up, and you're like, okay. And, people make comments that aren't always the nicest. I really, really try not to be easily offended on anything related to adoption, because, you know, I have always said that I want to be an open book with it, because it's my story, it's who I am, it shaped me. And if I get easily offended by somebody's comment that's normally made out of curiosity or ignorance, or a combo of the both, which seems to be the most dangerous, when ignorance and curiosity kind of mesh, you get questions like, well, are they your real parents? Are, you know, was there something wrong with you when you were adopted? Like, you just, growing up,
Yeah.
you hear those things. And, you're in those like home ec classes, and you're talking about families, and, they talk about adoption. And, I remember in high school, someone saying, you adopt puppies, you don't adopt babies. And I was like,
Mm.
well, that's wrong. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's a different way to look at it, I guess. But but those comments really never bothered me. I remember hearing them and thinking, yeah, high schoolers say funny, weird, and sometimes inappropriate things. So but there was definitely, as I got closer to that 18 mark, I remember, getting a letter when I was 12 from Tiffany, who's my birth mom. And she explained, it was like the first letter that I feel like, I think she understood I was getting old enough to have questions. And my mom had said that she wrote a letter to her and said that I had been asking a lot more questions, and if she could share with me what she felt comfortable sharing.
Mhm.
Because my mom and dad didn't really know a ton about my birth parents, except that they were very young, and that was about it. And I remember that they she shared that she had she got married, she went to school to become a nurse. I had a little sister, ironically also named Sarah, so I have two sisters named Sarah. And I just remember reading that letter, and I mean, I read it over and over and over again. And she told me that Aaron had moved back to California, my birth dad. They had lived there and had moved in when he was in high school. I happened, and then they moved back to California. And so, she explained all of these things, and that she had pretty much lost contact with him, but was staying in contact through his mom. And so I learned all of that at like 12 or 13. And, I just remember thinking, I want to know more. I want to know more. And I have to mark unknown on all the health boxes when I go to the doctor. And I hate that. I hate not knowing.
Mhm.
And I'm a people person. And so, the older I got, the more I was like, okay, when I turn 18, this is definitely something that I want to do. I want to meet my birth family.
have you ever had an experience that was so rich and blessed your life in such a way that you just couldn't keep that goodness to yourself? That's how I feel about the Cowgirls Over Coffee membership. This is a membership that connects rural and Western women with the strategies and support we need to purposefully manage our daily life. It's helped me personally cultivate the time and energy essential to help me feel content and in command while building a business, nurturing my family, and pursuing personal goals. You can find out more at cowgirlsovercoffee.com.
And I am a May baby. So my graduation, especially in small towns, I think they're even earlier, but I was going to be the beginning of May and my birthday is at the end of May. So in my mind, I'm like, for whatever reason, I wanted them to at least be invited to my graduation. Mm-hmm. And I think why was because, high school graduation is a big deal. You're getting ready to be launched into the world. And I just, for whatever reason, I wanted them to be invited and to be there and to see that I did it. And I remember going to my mom and dad and saying, I understand that my adoption says I have to be 18, but I really would like to invite them to my graduation. And so my mom got a hold of the agency. We went up to Kansas City and met with them, and we kind of explained the situation. We said, is this something that we can bring up since it is getting closer? And it was in January of my senior year. And they're like, absolutely, we can call her. And this is where I would not suggest this. So if you have an adopted kiddo, this is where I didn't agree at all, especially now being an adoptive mom, it makes me kind of prickle up a little bit that they did how they did it. But they got on speakerphone and called Tiffany, my birth mom, with me in the room. And that was the first time I heard her voice. And I remember she gets on there and I'm like, this is her. And they're like, hey, Christina's here. And knowing now what she was getting ready to walk into this huge business meeting for work. And she was like, yeah, I want to meet her, but can I call back? And then she's walking in. So I can't even imagine what she went through. But I remember thinking later, what if she had said no? Mm-hmm. And that'd be the first thing I heard. So I do remember thinking that. Thankfully, it did not turn out that way. But I would not suggest that at all. I should not have been in the room when that happened, but I was, and it turned out okay, thankfully. And so we met the next month, and I will say that I had a lot of support. I have a great group of girlfriends that were still friends from high school, and they were with me every step of the way. One of them was an undercover detective. She knew that I had a sister, and found a picture of her on the internet in a newspaper, a couple years before my senior year. And, just, they were always really supportive mm-hmm. of me. And my husband is my high school sweetheart. So he walked through a lot of this with me as well. And when it came time to meet Tiffany and her husband and my sister, I remember getting dressed that day, and I don't have the best style. And I remember dressing and going, I feel like I'm going into a job interview. I had a white button-up shirt and this black sweater vest. And so I just remember that and just laughing because it felt like an interview almost. You're going to meet someone that you have this connection with, but you're also complete strangers. And so driving there, like I said, I had a lot of support. I also had some family and friends that didn't understand why. And my sister struggled at first when I explained to her that this is something I wanted to do. And, but looking back, I kind of cringe at how I also handled that, because to think of it from her shoes, she didn't and hasn't met her birth family. And, that is every adoptee's choice, and I can see how hard that would have been. And I asked her to go with me, and she did. And she is just one of I cannot say enough about my sister. She has been there for me through everything. She is my best friend, and I'm so thankful for her. And I just remember crawling into her Oldsmobile and going to Blue Springs and, meeting Tiffany. And then it was just she was very quiet the whole time, but she stayed with me the whole time too. And so I just think back of the support, even though she didn't 100% agree, she was going to be there to support me and be there for me. And I met them because I wanted to know more. And like I said, I'm a people person, and the more the merrier in my book. I wanted that. I wanted to see if I had the same mannerisms, and, walking up to her front door and seeing her for the first time, just different things she did. My mom told me later, she's like, well, I know where you get that, look from, like, she's like, it's crazy to me. It's just crazy how I can have the same manners. And then I'll do something and Tiffany will be like, well, I know where you got that from. And she's talking about my mom. And so just the relationship there. And, they were at my graduation and my grandparents were there. And so, things for Tiffany felt, and all of her family and extended family, her husband's family were also and are also so amazing and welcomed me with open arms. And it just felt very natural. And we had hard conversations. We had very honest and open conversations. And it has been great. That year after my graduation, I still hadn't met Aaron, and I had only talked to his mom and my grandma and grandpa. And they flew me out to California to meet them. And I chose to go by myself. I had a couple people say they would go with me. And for whatever reason, I was like, no, I want to do this myself. And I remember the Ontario, California airport is like set up at a very big disadvantage for visitors like coming in, because like you like come in on the top level and you have to ride this escalator down. So here I am awkwardly riding this escalator down to this group of people that I am meeting for the first time. And I remember just standing there going, this is the most awkward thing I've ever done in my entire life. I don't even know what to do. And, I met them all. And unfortunately, things between my birth dad and I did not go great. And there was a lot of hurt there, and a lot of old wounds that were opened, and memories that were opened by seeing me. And, it was not good. And that moment, and like I made another trip out there to where, he wouldn't see me. He refused to see me. And I stayed with my grandparents, and I got to see my little siblings. I have 3 more siblings, and his wife is amazing. And my siblings are fantastic on that side as well. But there was a lot of hard, and I think a lot of it stemmed from my adoption. He struggled with that. And so, that kind of sent me into this like tailspin, and I went through like this period of, I call it my dark years, where my first year of college, so after I graduated, I went to junior college. I lived with my grandma, and then I went to Emporia, and that was like my first time ever being away from everybody, and during that time, things with Aaron kind of went from not so great to worse. And the rejection that happened, that I felt, and some things that were said, it just kind of put me in this like tailspin. And I pushed anybody and everybody out and away as far as I could, because I felt like I had been hurt and I was not going to get hurt again like that. I mean, Cody and I broke up. I didn't come home as often. Normally I was a homebody. I'd come home every weekend. I stayed away. I didn't really want to talk to anybody about it. I was just angry. And thankfully, my sister, some friends and family, like they never gave up on me. Like, they kept speaking truth. And I talked to our pastor, and I remember him saying, like, just bury it, and move on, and, just let it go. And so, and he suggested writing a letter and just laying out everything, and then, burning it. And I did. And I was able to be like, okay, one rejection, God's given me so many wonderful people, that it's okay. Like, I'm going to be okay. And so my husband, well, my now husband, we got back together, obviously, but thankfully he puts up with a lot for me. So we're still together. So, we got married, and our family is large and crazy and wonderful and confusing, and it's ours. So we got married, and we we were married about a year, and then you start talking like, when do we want to start a family and how do we want to start a family? And we both wanted to adopt. We did think we would be married quite a few years before adopting or having kiddos, but God just kind of kept putting it in our hearts and on our minds constantly. And I was 23 and my husband was 25, and we were like, we feel that we're supposed to adopt and we're supposed to start the process now. And a lot of countries wouldn't even look at us. We also felt that we were being led to international adoption. And so we started researching, and a lot of countries were like, you're too young, you haven't been married enough, you don't have, I was a teacher, and my husband was just starting his career as a mason. So, we weren't, we didn't have a lot. And I was driving my car from high school, we just didn't have, we were very young.
You had what was important, though, like you knew that you could make a home and really gift a child with that. It's not about all the other things. So
right. So, but we did get turned away for some of those things, and then we found our agency that we really felt comfortable with, and we were accepted. And then we were very drawn to Bulgaria. And funny little side note connection, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, is from Bulgaria. So that ended up being a huge blessing to us when we were in country on both of our trips over there. But, when we started the adoption process, we didn't have a lot, and we honestly had no idea, because adoption is expensive, and we were like, we just know that we're supposed to do this. And so our first agency fee, like, we were scrounging around getting it together, and then we had our home study right after it. And my parents are huge in Dave Ramsey fans, and so, like, for our engagement present, we went to the Dave Ramsey conference. And if you're not familiar with Dave, he has like the $1,000 emergency fund. Well, our communication at the beginning of our marriage was obviously not fantastic. And so we get to the point of, we need this home study money. And we're both like, well, it could be kind of considered an emergency, right? Like, we need it now. And so we both run to get it, and we both come back with envelopes, and we're like, what's that? And God provided. We both, through our lack of communication, we had the money because we both had got the $1,000 emergency fund out and not told the other person. So, and like, things like that happened through our adoption journey more times than not. And that one sticks out to me because we laughed about that one. We're like, we communicate well. We
right.
do. So, fast forward, we didn't, friends and family, and some dear friends of ours hosted an online adoption auction where people donated things and people bid against each other, and that raised a couple thousand. Friends did a garage sale, and then the big one was our Both Hands project that our church came alongside us. And we had a team of like 40 people, and they sent out sponsorship letters and asked people to sponsor them to work on a widow's house. And we painted her house and stained it. And in that one weekend, we raised $28,000 towards our adoption. And it was just like, oh my goodness, like,
that project. So I had never heard of the Both Hands project until I came to Mound City and through our church. And, that there's a Both Hands project going on right now, which I know is near and dear to your heart because it is
yes,
great friends of yours. But
yes.
Can you share a little more with the listeners about the Both Hands project and how that really works?
Yes. So the whole idea, it was started by JT Olson, and he tells it that he was going to go play golf or something. And he sent out a sponsorship letter, and someone said, if you were doing something besides golfing, like I'd sponsor you, something along those lines. And so he was thinking about like James 1:27, care for the orphan and care for the widow. And so he kind of merged those two ideas. And so it's caring for the orphan because the money that's raised, 100% of it goes into an adoption fund, and it is tax deductible. Like, so people, like if they make donations, it goes into this fund or bank account, for lack of better words. And that money can be used for the adoption expenses. And so like when we needed our airline tickets, we would only get like a week. We knew 1 week before we went for pickup. They called and said, we need you here next Saturday. So, it's like an immediate, and they step in and they pay it out of that fund. And so, you form this team, you find a widow, and that is willing to have you come in and do projects around their house. Ours was painting and deck staining and yard pickup. And then we get this team together. We ask the team to come together, and they all send out their letters to their people, like their friends and family, their, people that they know. And I think our team sent out, I think about 700 or 800 letters, just sent them out, and people sponsored them to come work with us on a Saturday. And we just painted this wonderful lady's house and stained her deck. And, there was all ages. There was itty bitties to older people, and it was just amazing. And so all the money that's raised went to our adoption fund. And so it's a very cool project. And I know personally of 3 from our church that have happened, and the generosity is just mind blowing to me, how people show up. So
I'll make sure and put a link to the Both Hands project in the show notes for anybody that wants directly to kind of learn more about that. But yeah, I just love getting to see like all of that happen really before I knew you. And so the video and the recap that was shared at church, and we'll have to figure out a way to share that too for our podcast listeners, because it just does such a great job of just kind of showing how everyone came together to make this happen. And I think one of the things that I've loved learning about you and your family and just your story, Christina, is how through you being willing to share, these different parts of your journey, like God is expanding your territory. He's giving you a voice. Like you're an incredible writer. And now you have a book that is dedicated to helping other families, with their journey as well, like normalizing this. So it's been awesome to see this, come full circle.
Every once in a while when I meet somebody new, they'll say, Dakota, where are you from? And I love having the opportunity to say, I grew up in a small town in rural Alabama. Now, whether you have small town roots or dream of one day trading in the city life for a little slower pace, or maybe you just enjoy an occasional weekend getaway where you can actually see the stars at night. Whatever your version of living the small town life looks like, my friends at thesmalltownlife.com, they have you covered with comfortable and unique ball caps and graphic tees that the entire family will love. Be sure to go follow them on Instagram and Facebook and use the hashtag #TheSmallTownLife when you're out there doing the small town living.
I think about, that Both Hands project, and that being such a blessing. And then when we came home, it was 2 trips back and forth to Bulgaria. The first one to meet and to do paperwork and everything. And then we were back home for 3 months before we could go back and pick him up. And he's so wonderful and such a huge blessing to us. And we were home, we were home a year or so, and then we found out that I was pregnant with our daughter. And shortly after she was born, my grandpa from California came to visit us. And that is really when the whole 2 Grandpas in a Truck book was born, because Gavin's English was not fantastic and he had the cutest way of saying things, and he was in preschool and he lived for grandpa to come pick him up in his truck. Like, that was the best day of his life, was when grandpa would come and pick him up. And so he would always request it. And he would always request it. My grandpa in a truck picked me up. And so when my other grandpa came in, his great grandpa came to visit us, he requested that his two grandpas come pick him up. My two grandpas in a truck, is what he kept saying. My two grandpas in a truck. We're like, yeah, buddy, your two grandpas in a truck will come pick you up. And, I had been sharing our story, like I said, I try to be open with it as much as I can be, while also trying to be mindful of the different people that have their stories interwoven with mine. But someone mentioned, they're like, you should write a book. And I am a doodler and I love writing and journaling. But I honestly just had no idea where to start. And even like preparing, like, to just chat with you, it's like, where do you start? There's so many moving parts. There's so many people involved. And, my kiddos are very blessed. I mean, they have 10 grandparents and, multiple great grandparents. And, it's just so hard. There's so many people, it's a huge and wonderful blessing, but it is kind of confusing. And so it's like, where do you even begin? And, I kind of sat on the idea. I tried starting, bits and pieces. I would, scratch down an idea, and it just never felt right. And it never felt good. And I want to say this too, like, after bringing Gavin home, I got a phone call from my birth dad, and he apologized. And, I apologized too, because I think there was a lot of hurt there, and unrealistic expectations on both of our ends. And, he found God and he gave his life to God and he apologized, and there was healing and redemption. Things are great with him now. So I want to share that too, because that was years later. But healing did come. And, I am grateful for the relationship that we have now. It was a hard road to begin with. And, it was not great for a long time. But, thankfully that relationship is healed. And that's a huge part of my story too, is just, sometimes healing takes time and it comes in different ways. And so, when my grandpa came back, and met him, that's Aaron's dad, so that is, I mean, we're all a family, and, there's some hard parts in there, but we had to have a lot of open conversations. There had to be a lot of grace. There had to be a lot of forgiveness. Adoption doesn't happen because things were going smoothly. I mean, adoption happens when a child is, separated from their mom and dad, and adoption has a way to redeem that and provide healing. But so, I wanted to share that too, that there's healing there. And so, when my grandpa came back and, we had that two grandpas in a truck, I guess kept going back to that saying. And just when I thought about it, like, if my dad, he's in overalls, my friends call him Mountain Man. They still do. He wears a straw hat and it has beads on it that he beaded on there. And then you look at my grandpa and, he wore a suit and tie to work. He worked in downtown LA. He's the mayor of a Southern California city. I mean, my dad would prefer to stay on his farm and not leave unless necessary. And the more I thought about it, the more funny it became, and then the more dear it became to me, because it was like, Gavin didn't realize what a request that was. Like, wow, like, to request those two grandpas to be in that truck at the, like, the things that had to happen, the grace that had to happen, the healing that had to happen for those three individuals to be in that truck together. I just remember thinking that. And it wasn't until years later, after our third kiddo came along, I remember being on maternity leave with her, and she was not a great sleeper. and she has and had a lot of health problems. And so I wouldn't leave really the hallway when she was sleeping, because I wanted to be close enough to hear and see her. And I remember just sitting down, and for whatever reason, I had just got done reading like Pig the Pug and all those rhyming books. Rosie Revere, the engineer, like all those, I love rhyme. And I remember thinking, oh, it'd be so cool to be able to write a children's book in rhyme about adoption. And all of a sudden, I just remember sitting in my hallway, and I had like this like teeny tiny notepad, like those skinny ones. And I had a pen, and I just started writing, and it just kept coming. I mean, it was just unreal. Like, starting with the two grandpas in a truck, like indifferent in all that they do. This unlikely pair seems silly. It's true. And it just like kind of came. It just like flooded me. And I just sat there in that hallway, and I just wrote and wrote. I mean, it is the sloppiest handwriting. And when I went back and reread it, it took me a minute, like, to figure out what I was saying. But it just came, and it was just like, okay, it's time to share. It's time to, we all feel, pretty confident in our roles now. Like, there's a lot of healing, like healing with Aaron came. I think I was also waiting on that too. I was waiting for hopefully there to be healing there. And there was, and, the relationships that have formed, and, it definitely is not just a family tree. We lovingly call it our family forest. And in Two Grandpas in a Truck, there's a tree in it a lot, and there's initials etched in the tree. And if you look closely at those initials, like, it's a nod to my biological family. It's a nod to my adoptive family, and my, just all the different relationships that are there. And it's not just on one tree, it's on all these trees, because it's a family forest. And so, in the book, we definitely talk about the family forest. And so, from this unfathomed grace, a family collided and met face to face. And, there grew a forest, not merely a tree. And, it just talks about how adoption created this big and crazy family. But it also talks about, that the book really it touches on the trauma, because like there was trauma in my story, there is trauma in my son's story, and there's heartache there, but it's also rooted in hope and like the good that comes with doing life together. And that I really that's my whole reason for this book, is like I hope that it like it'll talk about the joys and the realities will come into focus, but that, it just can encourage others that are going through it, and it can really encourage somebody that's not even going down the adoption journey. It's
Absolutely.
just
It's encouraged me. It's encouraged me just watching you take the steps to share your story. But I mean, like you said, there comes a point where the timing's right, and you can't sit with something anymore, because it would be a disservice. You're not pursuing your calling if you're sitting with it and not sharing it. And you knew when it was time. And it gives me a lot of hope too, and knowing that, like, I think everybody can relate to that piece, without a doubt.
Yes. Yeah. And, back in May, like, so when I approached my friend, the illustrator is a very, very close friend of mine. We met in college, and she was with me during that, what I call my dark time. She walked through a lot of that with me. We're very close. And when I asked her about it, because she is just an amazing illustrator. Like, when she took my picture of my dad,
he looks just like him, like literally,
yes,
like
yes,
identical. I love it.
Yes. And so when she showed me that, I'm like, you are so amazing. And so, when I first approached her, I'm like, hey, I wrote a book. And she's like, oh, that's so cool. Like, it's about adoption, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, would you like to illustrate it? And she just looked at me. We were sitting in a Red Robin in Olathe. And I just remember her looking at me going, what? I'm like, you don't have to answer me now. You don't have to answer me now, but just think about it. And that was 2 years ago. And, during that time, a lot of life happened. I am a former teacher, but I was teaching at the time. She still teaches, we both have families. So in May of this year, just a couple months ago, I remember going, can it be a goal of ours? Like, is it possible that we can release it in November? And this was May. And so we're both like, yeah, oh, of course, like a couple months, like down the road, no problem. And then my life kind of got shuffled around in July, and, you know, we moved, and somehow the book got published in the midst of all of that. You know, we were rejected by Amazon 12 different times. Our 12th time is when it all got accepted and it finally looked good and fit the formatting. But we were feeling some strong rejection there for a while, but we got it done. So
Oh, I'm so proud of you. And I had no idea that, you know, you think, oh, there's this book, but like so often you don't hear that backstory of, you know, it took 12 times. And one of the things I cling to, because I'm in sales, and I feel like in some way, every single one of us, we're in sales every day, whether we're selling the idea to our toddler to get in the car to get to school on time, or if you're truly selling a product, like we're in sales. And, you know, the sale starts when somebody tells you no. So the fact that, you know, 12 times, here we go again. Like, let's do
yeah.
this. So proud of you.
Thanks. Yeah, we were, you know, it was just a journey. And I have been on the phone with Amazon a lot and the publishers there, and they were fantastic. I will say that, but whew, when you keep getting rejected, it's just like, is it ever going to happen? And, you know, just a week and a half ago was when we were faced with another like setback, and we're like, November is a couple days away. And so thankfully, right before November, we got accepted. So uh, it's great. It's surreal. I can't believe it. You know, I can hold it in my hands. So
God's timing, right? Not ours.
yes,
No
for
better
sure.
way to say that. Well, you have the book. I can't wait for you know, us to be able to share that with all of the listeners. I know that this is going to just continue to expand your territory, you know, Christina, and bless a lot of lives. Are there any other resources that you can recommend to us that want to learn more about how we can just be more mindful, you know, of adoption, and make sure that we're not, you know, opening our mouth, inserting our foot when we don't mean to?
Yeah. So I definitely will say adoption is not always the answer. You know, we so often see like the numbers, and we're like, oh my goodness, you know, adoption's the answer. And yes, adoption is definitely one solution, and is the answer in some cases. But, you know, you know, foster care, there is family preservation efforts, there are, you know, like Compassion and Village of Hope. Like there are different organizations that are like have a family style care unit in the country of origin for these kiddos, and that's super important. And as you're doing holiday shopping, there are companies, there's like Noonday, they do like jewelry and accessories, and Bridgewater Candles, they do one where like if you buy a candle it feeds a child. Like there's so many ways to support women, because in some of these countries, like it's just nearly impossible for a woman to like sustain herself and a kiddo, and so some of these organizations step in and give them a way to earn money that they are making jewelry and then selling it, and it's at a fair wage, and it's a way for them to provide for their family. And that's one, that's beautiful. And so as you're doing holiday shopping, like maybe being more mindful of things you're buying, like what does this company stand for? Like, are they giving back? There's a little boutique in Independence, Kansas, and they are both adoptive mamas, and they give back, and they are very mission minded. And so, that's one way. And then just, through both hands, like people donated, so like they helped fund our adoption. And I heard this once, like, what if adoption is so expensive so others can get in on it. And I remember thinking like, I kind of wrestled with that for a little while, but it is so true. Like so many people have told us like that they love being a part of our family story. And we love that too. Like, for Gavin, we're like, we love you so much. Like, look at all these people that stepped in, and helped us and, be able to bring you home. And so that's a way, like when we came home from the airport, our grass was mowed. Like we came in home in September and our grass was mowed. Our fridge was fully stocked. People had broken and clean. It was fantastic. Like, I was like, woo, all right. But we also went through a phase of cocooning, or if you're familiar with that phrase for adoption, you come home and a kiddo's used to having multiple caregivers. So we kept to ourselves for months at home. And Cody and I were the only ones that were there and providing those basic needs. So he knew mom and dad were the ones that are the ones that care for me. And there was some really hard days. Trauma rears its head in very unexpected ways and at unexpected times. And I remember I walked out on my porch because it had been just a hard day, and Cody and I were tag teaming the hard that was happening. And I walked out on my porch, and this family in our small little town, they grow mums, and they had dropped off a mum, and I just fell apart because it was like I was seen, and I don't even know when they dropped it off. I have no idea, but I walked out and saw it and was like, oh my goodness, like just something as simple as that, like just reminding somebody, like if a family that's down the road that they're a single parent and they are trying, like stepping in there, that helps, like just seeing those needs and being able to fill them with whatever gifts you have. And I think, I struggled with this for a long time, and it took after our adoption process and walking through some medical things with our youngest, just to offer what you have and, offer it, even if it seems like your gifts are small, or if you have an obviously extravagant gift that you can offer to somebody, offer it, because you just never know like what that person needs. Like that mom meant everything to me that day. I got a card a couple of days later. It was a smiley face card, and it was just a handwritten note like, we're praying for you. And it was those little things that weren't little. They were huge to me. Like they probably seemed little to whoever sent it. They're like, oh, I don't know what to say. I'll just throw, like sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'll send them a card. And it doesn't feel like much, right? You're like, but then to the person who's receiving it, like those were like my lifeline some days, to outside of our home and what was happening. It was like someone sees us, someone's praying for us. Mm-hmm. And so I just, if someone that you can go do their laundry, I don't know that many people will turn you away if you say, I'm going to come. I wouldn't turn anybody away. I didn't turn anyone away. If they're like, I'll come fold some laundry, I'm like, sure, come on in. So those are just some practical ways. And, if adoption is something that's on your heart, I would love to be, your hype girl and, talk through like our experiences with agencies and, those different things. But I would definitely say training and support are huge. I mean, adoptive families normally are required to go through, I think we had like 32 hours of classes that we took, and it was on trauma, and it was on, just cultural differences and things like that. And, there's a book by Karen Purvis called The Connected Child. And, those books, like I still get them out and read them. They are amazing. Adoption books in general, just to start conversations. Our kiddos are growing, and, Gavin is our first and oldest. And so we have a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old, and she is very, very inquisitive and has tons and tons of questions. And we're noticing she has a lot more adoption questions right now. And obviously, so we wrote a book, and it's so like naturally is kind of being brought up. But there's other books like Babies Come from Airports, because she was really confused because, then Gavin's witnessing like me being pregnant with Colin's our youngest. And so Molly also witnessed that, and was old enough to understand there was a baby in my tummy, and so then, well, I was a baby in your tummy, and Gavin was like, well, I was too. And we're like, no, remember, your tummy mommy had you, so having those
Right.
conversations. And there's a book, like Some Babies Come from Airports, and we read that book, and it just helped so much our 5-year-old, like kind of explaining like that the whole process, but in a way that she could understand it. And so just reading books and having those open conversations. I don't feel like you can, obviously sometimes you have to think about the age of the kiddo involved, like you can't always share all the things, but being as honest as you can, and just talking about it and having grace and having, just an openness to, accept the questions you're going to get, because there's going to be hard questions and there's going to be hard conversations, and, just reach out for help and read, the Connected Child, and reach out to other adoptive families have been, some of our greatest resources, because, they understand. But I would definitely say, adoption is not always the answer. There's so many ways that everyone can jump in and help. And, you can think of globally or you can think locally. I'm sure we could, you could think of someone close to you that you could step in, a place that they might need more help.
So many great resources there, just, practical and things that, even if somebody's not pursuing adoption, just being mindful and helping other people be seen and heard. Because I think, fundamentally, we all want and need that. So cool that you have a book and it's helping
Yes.
share the stories and, just make this, have a conversation starter, just like you shared with those other books have been able to do for you and your family, Christina. Where can people go to find Two Grandpas in a Truck?
Yes. So you can go, it is available on Amazon. So you can just get on Amazon, search Two Grandpas in a Truck, and it will pop up. So also there is a hidden squirrel on every page. So our kiddos love finding hidden things. So there is a hidden squirrel. That was kind of a later thought. It was in July. We were having like one of our final like get-togethers about it. I'm like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if we added a squirrel on every page? And Leanna was awesome and added one. So yeah, but it's available on Amazon, and you can find it there. And I am on Instagram. I'm on social media. So you can find me there. And I would love to chat with you if you have, if people have questions. I would love to connect there as well.
She's a hype girl through and through. Whether, you're in the adoption process or not, she's been a real blessing in my life. I've enjoyed, getting to know Christina and her family better and count her as one of my friends. And she has been a hype girl for this podcast since the beginning, and really means a lot to me. So, Christina, it wouldn't be the Cowgirl Confessions podcast if we didn't wrap this up by asking you, what does the Cowgirl State of Mind mean to you?
Yes. So I think back, I had these beautiful like pair of black leather cowgirl boots. I bought them for a wedding, and it was a dear friend of mine. We wore these beautiful like little teal lace dresses, and she wanted us to wear black boots with them. And so I remember when I picked them out, like I just really, really loved these boots, and I felt good in them. And so I remember, when I slipped into them, I felt like, I can take on the world. Like I feel good. And I really think that is what the cowgirl state of mind is. It's slipping on your boots, no matter what you're getting ready to trudge through, but slipping them on and just going through it with like this grace filled confidence and just taking it on. But a lot of grace and a lot of confidence is what I think of.
That is beautiful. And I love that, friend. I love you. And I'm just so honored to have you on here to share your story, and pray that, lots of people share this so that it can bless lots and lots of other people. So thank you again for your time today. I've so enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. You are near and dear to my heart, and I just love you so much. So thanks for having me.
Thank thank you for spending your time with me on the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm so glad y'all stopped by. If you could take a moment to share this episode and tag us on social media, I'd be happier than a cowgirl in a sea of buy one, get one vintage turquoise. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. New episodes will be released bi-monthly. Please leave us a review if you feel so led by going to iTunes. Your feedback will really help us breed the idea of grabbing life by the horns with a cowgirl state of mind into women across the globe. Some that may have never even had the privilege to throw their leg over a horse, but could most certainly use the cowgirl state of mind while navigating life. Thanks again, y'all. Until next time, keep pursuing your dreams with that all go and no woe mentality. Remember, you're writing a story that's worth saddling up for, sister.